Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corman Productions, here to talk about the 2020 election candidates. Specifically, their views on mental health and mental illness issues. I generally keep the politics away from my channel, and there is a reason for that. Mental illness and mental health problems affects everybody, all walks of life. When you advocate for one side or the other in the political spectrum, half of your audience will tune you out. And in this fight to end the stigma, to increase attention on mental health problems, we need as many people as we can get. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, no party in the United States has been good on this issue. I certainly have my political viewpoints, and a lot of those viewpoints put me at odds with pretty much everyone, including those whose views I am generally sympathetic to. And if you listen enough to me, you can certainly glean the general idea of where I actually stand. Nevertheless, for reasons I've already stated, I firmly believe that it is important for my channel to remain relatively apolitical. I am not advocating for a specific candidate. I am not suggesting who should be president of the United States. I am only discussing where they stand on mental health and mental illness problems, as well as to talk about what they may have done while in power. I am also including the current President of the United States, who is a candidate for office in 2020. Again, in this video, I am not advocating for any particular candidate. I am not suggesting who you should vote for, except to say that this guy is a slimy weasel who speaks a lot in big flowery language, but ultimately says absolutely nothing. The only reason that he has any support whatsoever is because the corporate media is propping him up. He's the corporate media candidate. Not to mention the shenanigans that took place in Iowa during the most recent caucus. He's a lying liar who lies. Okay, now that I got that out of my system, let's move on. Before we talk about the individual candidates, though, I would like to go back in time to the Obama era, which is relevant because Joe Biden, Obama's vice president, is currently running for president. He is a candidate for office in 2020. A law was passed that if you were on Social Security benefits and you need a money manager as a result of mental illness, you are ineligible to own a gun. So in other words, your mentally ill grandmother is no longer allowed to own a gun. I can assure you that your grandma is not going on any shooting sprees. In this law, there was no need to prove that the said person was in any way a danger to society. I've talked about this before in a video nobody watched, and I wouldn't recommend it because the audio is terrible. But I thought it was worth repeating. This law has the rare distinction of being opposed by both the NRA and the ACLU. Unlikely bedfellows, to be sure. The ACLU's argument was that there were way more dangerous groups and way more likely to commit gun violence than the people that the bill targeted. Now, there are people out there who do believe that mental illness should be disqualifying for gun ownership. Actually, there are people out there who believe that nobody should own a gun. But I'm not addressing that specific group at this time. There are people in the general public and politicians that use mental illness as a catch-all, that talk about mental illness in broad terms. And you can't really do that. Mental illness covers such conditions as anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and so on and so forth. The sufferers of these conditions experience them at different levels of severity. Depression, for instance, can range from simply not being able to get out of bed to having a suicidal ideology. I suffer from depression and anxiety, and I am a danger to no one. I'm not even a danger to myself. So the question is, should I be ineligible to own a gun? And I think that's highly debatable. Now, mind you, I don't want a gun. If I had a gun, I'd probably end up shooting myself in the foot. But that's not really the point. Gun control laws, specifically designed to prevent mentally ill people from owning a gun, is problematic. It can be used to take guns away from anybody the government doesn't like. And it is dangerous when we are talking about policy regarding mental health and mental illness in this country to talk about it in broad terms, because these topics are very diverse. One size does not fit all, and you need some nuance in the discussion. Moving on to the current candidates for president, we'll start with Andrew Yang, even though technically he is no longer a candidate, as he just dropped out after the New Hampshire primary. He wasn't really in it to win it. He was in it to bring up the issue of universal basic income. If you don't know what that is, I would highly recommend looking into it, as it really is quite fascinating. On his site, Yang 2020, he writes, "Mental health is an important component of our overall health, and it should be treated that way by our healthcare system. There is a mental health crisis in America, with 1 in 5 adults experiencing mental illness annually. Our life expectancy is declining due in part to increasing rates of suicide, especially among American youth. The teen suicide rate has gone up 56% from 2007 to 2017 and is the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages 10 and 34. Now I'm going to stop there for a moment and repeat that. It is the second leading cause of death in Americans between the ages of 10 and 34. 10-year-olds should not be killing themselves, ever. That should just not be happening. But it is. It is happening. And that's an indication of a very serious problem when 10-year-olds are killing themselves. Yang goes on to say that 7.7 million youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year, but only half receive treatment. Anxiety and depression levels are at record highs. People of color and the LGBT community also experience higher risk of mental health issues due to disproportionate social and economic challenges. Our veterans, too, do not receive the necessary mental health treatment they need when they come home. 22 veterans commit suicide every day, since many don't seek treatment due to embarrassment or shame. We need to destigmatize veteran treatment and support their stability to ensure successful transition to civilian life. Substance abuse and mental health account for 1 in 8 emergency department visits. Only 43% of Americans with a mental illness receive treatment due to inadequate insurance coverage and provider shortages. It is urgent to integrate mental health care into health insurance plans and destigmatize mental health care while encouraging an increase in the number of people able to provide treatment. He goes on to say more. I'm not going to read all of it. But, as president, he says he would integrate regular mental health checkups into primary care. And that's something I absolutely agree with. Mental health checkups should be as regular as physical checkups, in my opinion. He would provide new funds for suicide prevention and awareness competency training for school administrators and teachers, and provide greater access to mental health services in schools. Build the mental health workforce through expansions of training programs and loan forgiveness programs for those that choose to provide these services to rural and underprivileged areas. invest in veteran mental health and improve funding to crisis helplines. Utilize the current telehealth system to alleviate the widespread shortage of mental health care professionals. Remove accessibility barriers caused by distance and transportation and provide treatment from the privacy of patients' homes. Begin a national anti-stigma campaign for mental health issues. Everybody needs help sometimes, and that is a message I absolutely 100% agree with. Good stuff, Yang. It's unfortunate that you will not be president, but you do still have a voice that people listen to, and it would be highly appreciated if you continue to talk about these issues, along with your pet project, UBI. Joe Biden, during the New Hampshire Democratic debate, brought up the CURE Act. And since he brought it up, I think it's only fair to take a look at the act, which was passed during the Obama years. According to the site Policy Medicine, the Cures Act was designed to help accelerate medical product development and bring new innovations and advances to patients in need more efficiently. The Cures Act authorized $500 million over the course of 9 years to help the United States Food and Drug Administration, otherwise known as the FDA, cover the cost of implementing the law. At face value, that doesn't really sound that bad, but let's take a little bit of a deeper look. An article I found on PBS NewsHour, written by Sheila Kaplan, titled "Who Wins and Loses with the 21st Century Cures Act," reads as follows. Sponsors of the 21st Century Cures Act call it a win-win, a fusion of funds for medical research with new rules that direct the Food and Drug Administration to approve drugs and devices with greater urgency. There's also money to help states fight the opioid epidemic, and a boost for mental health care. The first winner, according to the article, is the drug companies. And any law that lists the drug companies or the pharmaceutical industry as the big winner is automatically suspect in my eyes. Skipping down a few, the first loser is the FDA. The article says that the $500 million designated for the FDA is meant to pay for the agency's new responsibilities under the CURE Act. There is virtually nothing in it to improve some of FDA's long-time problems. The Government Accountability Office considers two of the FDA's areas of focus especially high risk: food safety and post-approval oversight of medical products that went through the fast track. There's also no money in the Cures Act for aging, deteriorating labs outside of headquarters, which Commissioner Dr. Robert Califf has said pose a serious problem. Also listed as a loser in the law is consumer advocacy groups. Public Citizens Health Research Group and the National Center for Health Research campaigned hard against the Cures Act. Although they were able to make some changes, both organizations believe the CURE Act, as it stands, will endanger public health by weakening FDA standards. The reason they feel that way is because of the switching standards from randomized clinical trials to real-world evidence. Basically, this is for information derived from observational studies, patient input, anecdotal data, and other research to drug and device approval. Randomized clinical trials, which is how they've been doing things up to this point, are going to become less of a thing. One of the opponents of the law happens to be running against Joe Biden for president in Elizabeth Warren. I managed to find a statement of her attacking the bill that is quite lengthy. I'm going to focus on a part of it, specifically where she talks about the giveaways. The first giveaway that she describes in her statement is legalizing fraud. She says it is against the law for drug companies to market drugs for uses not approved by the FDA. Some drug companies find this rule annoying. After all, they could make a whole lot more money selling a headache pill as a cure for everything from hair loss to cancer, but pushing treatments without scientific evidence that they work is fraud. Fraud that can hurt people. It also undercuts the development of real cures. That's why some of the largest law enforcement actions against big drug companies in the last 15 years have involved off-label marketing. Drug companies have paid billions in penalties. One solution would be for these companies to start following the law, but they prefer Plan B, cozy up to enough people in Congress to pass this cures bill that would shoot holes in the anti-fraud law. Second giveaway, cover up bribery. Right now, the law requires drug companies to disclose the buckets of money they shower on doctors and hospitals to encourage them to prescribe certain drugs. It's all published on a government website. You can go look up your doctor or hospital right now if you want. The drug companies could have responded by ending kickbacks, but they've chosen Plan B, again, cozy up to enough people in Congress to pass this cures bill that would let drug companies keep secret any splashy junkets or gifts associated with medical education and make it harder for enforcement agencies to trace those bribes. The third giveaway, according to her, is handing out dangerous special deals to Republican campaign contributors. She leaves out the fact that drug companies and Big Pharma are now handing out contributions to the Democratic Party as well. She goes on to say that people could die from using unproven treatments. In fact, people have already died even during carefully controlled research experiments on these type of treatments. Congress shouldn't be in the business of selling FDA favors to the highest bidder, risking people's lives to enrich political donors. Bernie Sanders, another candidate running against Joe Biden, also had something to say on the Cures Act. He says that at a time when Americans pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, this bill provides absolutely no relief for soaring drug prices. The greed of the pharmaceutical industry has no limit, and this bill includes numerous corporate giveaways that will make drug companies even richer. It's time for Congress to stand up to the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies, not give them more handouts. To be fair, there are proponents of the bill, including the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI for short. They say that the Cures Act will improve integration and program coordination across federal agencies that serve people with mental illness and remove unfair barriers to mental health care. It will also address the needs of people with mental illness who become entangled in the criminal justice system. Bernie Sanders actually has quite a bit to say on mental health issues, and he basically ties a lot of it into his Medicare for All program. A lot of this comes from the mentalhealthforus.net site. He says that we are experiencing a crisis in mental health treatment in this country. Bernie's Medicare for All plan would address this crisis by providing comprehensive coverage for mental health and substance abuse treatment services, as well as prescription drugs. Mental health care under Medicare for All will be free at the time of service, with no co-payments that can be a barrier to treatment. On the opioid epidemic and the increasing number of people dying from drug overdoses, Sanders says he will focus on treatment and prevention. We cannot continue to treat the people struggling with disease of addiction as criminals. As president, Bernie will give people struggling with opioid addiction the health care they need by guaranteeing health care, which includes substance abuse and mental health services to all people as a right, not a privilege, through Medicare for All. Amy Klobuchar on that same site said that our country has experienced a 30% increase in suicides in just 15 years. As part of her plan to combat addiction and prioritize mental health, Senator Klobuchar will increase investments in state and local suicide prevention initiatives, including a focus on veterans, farmers, LGBTQ, and tribal communities. To expand the tools and data available in this fight, Senator Klobuchar will invest in suicide prevention programs, expand resources and health services that address suicide among students, and share information with parents, mental health research, and data reporting. She said about the shortage of mental health and addiction care providers, which is a huge issue by the way. Senator Klobuchar believes that combating mental health conditions and substance use disorders requires a workforce with the training to provide the highest level of care. Her plan will provide improved training for mental health and substance abuse health professionals, including training for healthcare professionals to administer medication-assisted treatment. Elizabeth Warren says, "I start with a basic principle. Healthcare is a human right that no person should be denied. I believe that we should do our best to make sure that people who are incarcerated are treated with basic dignity and respect, including those with mental illness. That means taking a comprehensive approach to incarcerated people who face mental health and addiction challenges, including requiring an adequate number of counselors and addiction specialists, individualized treatment, and increased access to medication-assisted treatment. I co-sponsored the Comprehensive Justice and Mental Health Act, which sought to facilitate collaborative mental health support for people who have come into contact with the criminal justice system." She goes on to say much more. In fact, all these candidates have much more to say on the issues, but I do not have 5 hours to read everything that they have to say. Tom Steyer doesn't have much to say on the issue, and Mayor Pete, I just have no interest in repeating anything he has to say because, quite frankly, I don't believe him on anything. He is the one guy who I am showing some bias to because I believe him to be an empty suit and nothing more. Which just leaves one more person to talk about, and that's our current president, Donald Trump. I wasn't able to find an article on this, but I do remember comments that he made a few years ago on veterans coming back from war. What he said was taken out of context. Basically, he was trying to talk about veterans experiencing PTSD coming back from war, and he did so in an inelegant way, but he was not calling these veterans weak, as the media tried to portray. Now listen, there are plenty of legit criticisms that you can make against this president. We don't need to make things up. For instance, he has made comments worthy of criticism. According to an article written by Politico on August 15th of 2019, President Trump on Thursday advocated the return of more mental health institutions to combat gun violence, while also throwing his support behind background checks for gun purchases. Speaking with reporters in New Jersey before heading to a campaign rally in New Hampshire, Trump said mental health was an under-considered factor in gun violence and that his administration would examine it at a level that hasn't been done before. "These people are mentally ill," Trump said of mass shooters, and nobody talks about that. We have to start building institutions again because, if you look at the 60s and 70s, so many of these institutions were closed, and the people were just allowed to go back onto the streets. That was a terrible thing for our country. Caitlin Cruz of Splinter News says that if your goal is to make everyone afraid of anyone with a depression diagnosis, then Trump reached it. Painting institutions where we lock up all the people whose brains don't work like you want them to as a solution to gun violence would be laughable in its absurdity if it wasn't such a terrifying concept. And yeah, I'm not going to mince words here. These comments are pretty terrible. Once again, this is painting with a broad brush and using mental illness as a catch-all phrase. I've already discussed at length why this is a problem. Building more institutions is not a solution to the mental health and mental illness crisis situation in this country. Furthermore, these comments demonize the mentally ill, the vast majority of which are non-violent. Now, if these comments were taken out of context, or if you have more to say on the issue of mental illness, Mr. President, I would gladly listen to what you have to say. Though I doubt you have any interest in actually talking to me because I'm a small channel on YouTube with only 110 subscribers. Nevertheless, I welcome a discussion with you, or anyone, on these issues. As I've said over the years, mental illness is a growing problem within our country and without. It deserves some serious consideration, and I am heartened to see some people doing so and giving the issue its due attention. Before I conclude this video, I would like to remind people that I do have a Kickstarter going on for Dave 2020, the movie, which will deal with mental health issues. Success will mean a feature-length version of my Dave-isode series on YouTube, as well as an overall increase in the quality of my videos. I could use your help. Either share my Kickstarter or contribute. There are rewards for contributing that you can check out on the site. The link will be included in the description of this video. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. This is Dave from Corman Productions, signing off.